There is no Chinese director like Lau Kar-leung. He came up through the ranks, starting as an extra in old Wong Fei-hung movies, to become the Shaw brothers' greatest action choreographer and then one of their greatest directors. He focused on real martial arts principles, yet it still made fight movies as exciting as the more outlandish kung fu films of the time. He collaborated with the best: Gordon Liu, Kara Hui, Chen Kuang-tai, his own brother Lau Kar-leung, and eventually even Jackie Chan, though the two didn't really hit it off. He married the most beautiful woman in Shaw brothers history. He directed over 24 films, almost every one a classic, and wrote 4 of their screenplays, 4 stone-cold classics. You know you're watching a Lau Kar-leung movie because the fighting feels so visceral, so much like the antagonists are really trying to take each other down, and they do it in a way that's completely believable. Not surprising if you remember that Lau's father, who taught him martial arts, was a student of the magnificent butcher Lam Sai-wing, himself a student of the great Wong Fei-hung himself. Bruce Lee looked up to Lau and consulted him on career decisions. So when challenged by a fellow fan recently to rank Lau's top 10 movies, it was a little daunting. Like, which Picasso painting is the best? What's the best Shakespeare? But I tried by scientific process and personal whim and came up with this list. It's sure to infuriate fans, but it's also meant for those who really don't know Lau's work already, or maybe have only seen Drunken Master 2, which isn't on the list, sorry, or 36 Chamber. So here we go into dangerous waters. Lady is the Boss. I said this in my Kara Hui tribute, but Hui's twin star vehicles from her early career, My Young Auntie and Lady is the Boss, tell essentially the same story. An upstart leader is given the reins over a stodgy kung fu school, which is not really ready for her. I prefer Lady is the Boss, though Auntie is the better known film, because the final fight is a really satisfying homage to iconic Shaw brothers scenes, and the humor genuinely makes me laugh, which it does in Auntie as well, but more so here. Comedy is not something that translates easily across cultures, so when a Chinese movie makes me laugh, it's hitting something unique. Mad Monkey Kung Fu. This movie manages to be hilarious and grimly dramatic at the same time. Chen, an opera actor who excels at playing the Monkey King and has the kung fu skills to back it up, and is played by Lau Kar-leung himself, gets framed by a corrupt businessman who wants to take Chen's sister for his concubine. Crippled and exiled, he befriends a young thief, and through a long friendship, teaches him martial arts. I've long suspected that either Lucas or Kirshner saw this when planning The Empire Strikes Back. The relationship between the hot-headed young talent and the quirky old man reeks of Luke and Yoda. The second act is lighthearted and full of comic chemistry between the leads, but the first and last acts are harsh and dark. It's a real balancing act. Return to the 36th Chamber, 1980. Making a sequel to one of the greatest films of all time is tricky. You have to flip the original on its head, or somehow develop that original material in a way that feels organic. Return to the 36th Chamber does the first, recasting Gordon Liu as an imposter pretending to be the monk Sante, whom he had played in the monumentally successful first film. This flim-flam artist uses his meager skills to balk villagers of their money, but when he's found out by Manchu mercenaries, causing more misery to the villagers, the con man flees to Shaolin, where he comes under the supervision of the actual Sante, whom he's been impersonating. He undergoes a series of humiliating jobs and teaches himself actual kung fu on the sly. It's a story of a bad boy turned good, which might be predictable, but it has a lot of heart. And of course, it has Gordon Liu's superb skills. Shaolin Monks. I've done a full review of this one previously. It's a lean, logical thriller about a man who marries into an enemy family as a spy and has to battle his way out. He develops a real affection for his wife and mother-in-law, which makes the violence of his struggle heartrending. We're at the midpoint of this top 10, and there hasn't been one film I would not highly recommend so far. Onwards and upwards. 36th Chamber of Shaolin. I'm going to get flack for placing this so low on the list because it's arguably one of the greatest kung fu films ever made. The training sequences are legendary, and I can rewatch them endlessly. The intro, where Liu Yide, later the monk Sante, sees his friends and family slaughtered and escapes to Shaolin Temple, is a great setup, and the final fight with Lo Lie is excellent. So why so low on my list? Well, the third act really relies pretty heavily on your familiarity with Sante's crop of students after he leaves Shaolin, now a highly trained killer. He trains familiar faces like Wang Yu and Norman Cui for a sort of death heist to catch and kill the general who murdered his school and his family. But the last stretch drags unless you have enough knowledge to get excited about each new team member being introduced, which I didn't going into it, so the film teeters a little when standing on its own, despite the unimpeachable hour of training sessions in Shaolin. That hour makes this film stand head and shoulders above most other action films ever made. 8 Diagram Pole Fighter. I did a review on this previously as well. It is a brutal movie about PTSD and revenge. A young spearman, once again played by Lau Kar-leung's almost brother Gordon Liu, takes refuge in a monastery after his family is slaughtered and trains for revenge using only a pole with no spearhead. Kara Hui co-stars in one of her most athletic performances. For an eloquent summary of why this film is so great, check out my buddy Mitch's interview on Ryan Run's Cinematic, linked in the description. Heroes of the A man marries a beautiful Japanese girl and discovers that she's actually an accomplished martial artist, and that her ex-boyfriend in Shifu is a fearsome warrior. The husband offends his bride's national pride, so she calls in a squad of Japanese fighters with different skills to prove that her country is better than China. This is a film I cannot help referencing often. Like Lady is the Boss, it's a rare Chinese comedy that I really dig, and to my knowledge it's the only Shaw Brothers action film where nobody dies. The fighting may not always be amicable, but it is consistently fun. Of course China gets the upper hand in the end, but the range of Japanese talent, led by the charismatic Kurt Yasuaki, really impresses. A fun flick for your girlfriend who does not like Asian action films. Executioners from Shaolin is sure to get its own video soon. No other Shaw Brothers movie could I name that had such a breadth of style and scope, while never losing sight of what it is, a driven revenge piece about a Shaolin novice who seeks revenge on the evil monk Pai Mei. The storyline is familiar, especially to anybody who's seen Chang Cheh's Shaolin saga, and Lo Lie's Clan of the White Lotus even stars two of the same actors following a very similar plot, where a macho hero can only defeat Pai Mei, or his identical brother, if he adds feminine kung fu to his yang styles. Executioners follows that plot, although it's only Chung Kwan Tai's feisty son, played by Wang Yu, who could get the job done. Where it's unique is that Executioners from Shaolin deals with the sweeping history of how Shaolin refugees morphed into southern pirates and then into quietly subversive farmers. Meanwhile, we had a love story, tableaus of country living, some low-key comic work by the three heroic leads, and some of the coolest training sequences this side of 36 Chambers. At 100 minutes, Executioners feels like a 3-hour Hollywood epic in the best of possible ways. You dirty hoe. Yet another brilliant comedy. A prince, traveling incognito, recruits a young rascal, Ho Jen, to accompany him back to the palace. The prince, played by, yes, Gordon Liu yet again, poisons Ho, but he is himself wounded, making the pair mutually reliant on each other on the road trip north. Along the way, the prince fights off assassins, always concealing his skills with accidents, art gallery panels, and even using Kara Hui as a puppet. The range of set pieces is complemented by the inventive fighting of Liu. As his sidekick Dirty Ho, Wang Yu is likable and often very funny. Martial Arts of Shaolin. I'm also going to get flack for this one, just as I will for placing 36 Chamber below it, and probably for not including Drunken Master 2, which does include a great fight between Lau and Jackie Chan under a railway car, but just didn't make the cut for me. Martial Arts of Shaolin was Jet Li's only film at the Shaws, and only his third film, period. I've mentioned before the vast vistas of Chinese scenery and the sweeping scope of what could otherwise have just been a basic revenge story. None of this feels like a Lau Kar-leung movie, and having Jet Li as the main recognizable star, no Gordon Liu, no Lo Lie, no Kara Hui, etc., does make this stick out, and it'll raise some eyebrows from other fans. However, I must admit that I love this movie partly for sentimental reasons. It's one of the first films that made me take Chinese cinema seriously, and eventually led to my move to China. Jet Li is adorable in it as a monk who accidentally comes across his long-lost betrothed. The action is satisfying, if very different from what you'd expect in a Lau Kar-leung film, and the movie really made me want to try Baozi for the first time, which is a much weirder statement than it sounds if you see the film. If you haven't checked out Lau Kar-leung or only know the greatest hits, probably 36 Chamber and My Young Auntie, I hope this list gets you to try a couple of the others. Lau is the unquestionable master of action directing and could flip between drama and comedy effortlessly, sometimes in the same film. Hats off to a master.